So we now know that Utterson and Poole, they're going to break in and they've sent other servants around to cover the front. And one way or another, this is going to come to an end. One of the interesting one of the things it's kind of cool when I'm reading a book and I see a word that I actually didn't know. And one of the things it talks about the door, it talks about the red baize. I actually had to look this up. I had no idea what baize was. A baize is imitation felt. So it's just referring to the substance on the door. The idea of there being imitation felt on the door, the felt can be used to do a couple of different things. When you think about felt, if you don't know what felt is, think about the material on a pool table, that green surface, that's a felt surface. And the idea of felt used through the door, felt is, the idea, number one, it can be looked at as luxurious, but the also idea is it's a sound dampener, right? So I don't know if you know this, but that's also why pool tables have felt on them, not only to keep the tables from being damaged over time, but it also reduces the noise of the balls on the actual table. The balls make sound on a pool table when they hit each other, but they don't make as much of a sound when they're rolling across the surface. So the idea of the red baize and the felt on the door is both luxury and also to give more privacy. So I actually hadn't heard that term baize before, so it's kind of cool to learn a new word. I'd read this book before, but I had totally forgotten this word. And as they're breaking in, right, they hear, and when Mr. Utterson hears the voice, he says, "It's Edward Hyde, we're breaking in." And Edward Hyde calls out, "Utterson, have mercy, have mercy." And, they think that Dr. Jekyll is probably dead inside. And they go in and they try to see what they find and what's going on there. And they see a lot of glazed presses. Here's a picture of a curio. It's the closest thing I can find to a picture of a glazed press. A glazed press simply refers to cabinets with glass doors and windows, usually for holding various kinds of chemicals, right? You see them in the chem lab, I'm sure, different cabinets that have glass things so you can see the things that are inside. The reason why they're called glazed presses, the glazed simply refers to the glass, right? If you don't know why the idea glass gets its name, is because, in order to make glass, it has to go through a glazing process, right? So glazed presses are just the cabinets. And they go in and they break in, and what they say is they find Mr. Hyde's body on the floor, his life slipping away, right? They can tell he's still alive, but he won't be alive much longer. And Utterson talks about the distinct smell of kernels. Now, it's one of those things where when we hear kernels, right, this is, again, one of those words that we don't hear as much anymore. And there's a very clear implication when he talks about the smell of kernels. He says the smell of kernels indicates that Hyde is a self-destroyer, right? That means that he died by suicide. And the thing is to get from one thing to the other, right? It's like, how does he know that? And this is one of those things that would have been known very, very commonplace in the 19th century. So a kernel, right? You might hear of kernels of corn, right? It refers to either the seed, the inner part of a seed, or nut. And so when you talk about a kernel, you can refer to like little seeds or little nuts, right? So what basically Utterson is saying is by the smell of kernels, he is knowing the smell of poison. And in this particular case, the very famous poison that is smelled there's a particular very famous kind of poison that smells like almonds, right? So he's referring to kernels as in the inner part of a seed or nut, and he's referring to the smell of almonds. And if you didn't know what smells of almonds, it's the common poison called cyanide. And there are different kinds of cyanide, but cyanide is a very common household poison at the time. It's harder to get hold of cyanide now, but at the time, cyanide was very common because it was used for pests, right? Like bees, wasps, ants, just to poison things. People would use poison all the time. And the smell of kernels, particularly the smell of almonds, was one of those things that people knew to avoid. It was a very commonplace thing because it was a very commonplace poison that was used by normal people on a regular basis. So you taught children that if something smelled like kernels or smelled like almonds, burning almonds or anything like that, they knew they needed to get away as soon as possible. So this smell of kernels indicates the smell of cyanide, indicating the smell of danger. And so all we know is that they go in and they search the whole lab. They find Mr. Hyde. He's dead. He kills himself rather than be captured or face justice. And we know, right, that he has been sending out for a particular kind of drug at all of these different druggists, right? And he keeps saying, you know, I need the original salt, right? The original thing that you had. He keeps being sending out, and he's been doing all these experiments. And right, once again, you know, they notice that there's the shovel glass, right? They notice the shovel glass, and they're wondering what in the world did he need this mirror for? What did he need this thing for? And they're not certain. And when they find his dead body, Hyde's dead body, they then make a very thorough search of the lab and all of the thing around it, and they can't find Henry Jekyll. But what they do find is they find a new copy of a will. And in this case, everything is left to Utterson and not Hyde. And Mr. Utterson is wondering why Mr. Hyde would not have destroyed the will. But he finds that will in the hand of Henry Jekyll, meaning in the handwriting of Henry Jekyll. And he's wondering why Hyde would not have destroyed it, right? Why, you know, if Hyde has been here all day, why would Mr. Hyde not destroy this will? And so all of these things are coming to pass, and there's a lot of mystery of what in the world is going on. And, you know, they talk about things, various enclosures, right? Enclosure simply means something that has been enclosed. It can refer to like an enclosed space, like a space surrounded by a fence, but it can also refer to, you know, a surrounded or enclosed object, like a letter inside an envelope can be an enclosure, right? And the thing is in finding all this material, right, he sees the new will, he sees this confession of Henry Jekyll, but it says in the confession of Henry Jekyll to read Dr. Lanyon's confession first. You know, Henry Jekyll even leaves a note, and this note is very, very strange. He says, right, to him, my dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands, I shall have disappeared. Under what circumstances, I have not the penetration to foresee. But my instinct and all the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure and must be early. Go then, and first read the narrative which Lanyon warned me he was to place in your hands, and if you care to hear more, turn to the confession of your unworthy and unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll. Right, and that's so at this point, when Utterson finds the letter by Henry Jekyll, right, his first instinct, since it was written that day, is that maybe Henry Jekyll has fled or is in hiding. Maybe he has gotten away from Hyde, and maybe he's still alive, but I need to find out what's going on. Maybe Jekyll can still be saved. You know, he must be alive and in hiding. That's Utterson's first thing. But before he can do anything, and they don't even call the police yet, right? And this is another one of these interesting things is that in this situation, they don't even call the police. This was an era where people handled their own business themselves, generally speaking. And also, the reason why Utterson doesn't call the police is he is still interested in protecting the reputation of his client. And because of that, right, he's not going to tell them to call the police until he's gone. You know, he tells them to wait until midnight, several hours, right? He says, right, he says don't call the police until midnight in order to read first and know the details before the authorities get involved. Because he doesn't even know what he wants the authorities to know, right? And once again, right, this is also why the servants didn't call the police. Because you got to remember, with this idea of class division, right, they are totally dependent on Jekyll for their livelihoods. I mean, I think we understand how people are really very much indebted to other people now more than ever. Because, you know, there are a lot of people who are not working, and there are a lot of people who are financially dependent. They just don't want to call the police on Jekyll fearing something that's wrong because they're still getting paid, right? What if Dr. Jekyll has been murdered? Does that mean they're all going to lose their jobs, right? Or what if we get Dr. Jekyll in trouble? What's going to happen to us then? Right? So one of the reasons why they even went to Utterson in the first place, not only did they not know what to do, not only did they need to wait for a higher authority to get involved, but they also, were very worried about their own security and the security of their own fortunes and jobs. And so this is all part of this just general idea of, because everyone's dependent on, the master, so to speak. I mean, it's not the nicest way to say it, but because of class dependence, right? Because without Dr. Jekyll, they don't have jobs, they don't have homes, they don't have food, right? This continues the society based upon secrecy, right? Even Utterson, who's trying to do the right thing, he's still reinforcing this Victorian secrecy. The servants protect their master because that's their source of livelihood and their source of income. Utterson is protecting his clients. People protect the secrets of the rich because they're the master. They're the one in charge. They're the one who their whole living is dependent on them. And that's the thing. That's kind of what this whole system, and so this keeps going, the general theme within the text of the idea of how Victorian secrets are maintained, because servants, because of the one who pays them, they keep their mouths shut. They don't want to know what's going on a lot of the time. I mean, they're afraid for Henry Jekyll because they think he's a kind and decent man, but they know if he goes to prison or if his reputation is ruined, right, they may be ruined as well. And so one of the things, right, that is also important to understand in terms of this climax of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is, there have been reasons why numerous people, right, including Lanyon, the servants, right, have been silent and protecting secrets, right? This is one of the major ideas of what is going on, is that Hyde, right, he had been loose on London for a very long time. Between the time of the murder and the time when Utterson met him, at least a year had gone by. So who knows how long Hyde had been around. So the idea is a lot of these things, right, people know different things, and there have been a lot of different clues and tokens in the text of things that have been going on, but no one has put it together because there have been a lot of reasons, right? The thing is one of the reasons in Victorian society why a lot of these things don't get uncovered is in a society where the people who are the servants and the people who make up the majority of the population, because they are financially dependent on the upper class, there is the instinct, right? And one of the things that becomes important to understand is the upper class is protected for financial and personal reasons, right? That everyone kind of maintains the facade. Everyone maintains the system because they're dependent on it. They're part of it, right? And this is one of these kind of things that Robert Louis Stevenson is taking a shot at. And it had to build and build and build. And it wasn't until like they finally just couldn't take it anymore and they believed, that Dr. Jekyll really had been murdered. It took Poole a week to come to Utterson, right? And who knows how long, right? How much longer it would have taken had, they not been so worried and whatnot. So these are some of the more ideas that are being presented in the last night. So the rest of the reading of this text is Dr. Lanyon's confession and Dr. Jekyll's confession. And we are going to start talking about those next week. And in those readings, all is going to be explained. And then we are going to, do a much deeper dive on some of the meaning and the symbolism of Jekyll and Hyde. I hope you really enjoy the rest of your reading because we're going to spend pretty much the rest of the 4-day week next week on the rest of this book. And then we'll get into, we'll spend a day on each of those. We'll actually probably spend 2 days on Jekyll's confession. And then we'll start talking about just the deeper meanings and themes and do a much deeper dive on a lot of this stuff. This is some really, really cool stuff. And Robert Louis Stevenson, I really feel, has kind of built a really masterly piece of lit here in where it's going. But this is the part 3 for, I believe this is April the 8th, Tuesday, April the 8th. And Jesus loves you, and so do I. And I look forward to seeing you all as soon as possible. I'm praying that we get back in school sooner than we all expect.